Hey, welcome everybody. Hey, thank you guys for coming. My name is Barry Lynn, and I run the Open Markets Institute with a bunch of great partners. And I have with me Angela Huffman, who is the co-founder and vice president of Farm Action, and these are our fantastic partners. And we've been partners with Farm Action since their founding, and with both Joe and Angela and everybody else at Farm Action for many years now. And we're just thrilled to have them along today on this event. I mean, this is a little strange. Last time I was actually speaking in this town a couple weeks ago was in front of the defense bar of the American Bar Association. So these are the people who defend monopolists, so it's a lot better to see you all today. So anyway, 40 years ago, in this country, farming in America looked a lot like it did 200 years before that at the founding. Family farms all across America, family-owned processors, family-owned retailers, a nation run by families, by individuals, a nation run by citizens, a nation run from the bottom up. That's what America looked like 40 years ago. But 40 years ago, we also did something. We changed our competition policy. We changed our antitrust laws. And since then, we've seen massive consolidation at every level of our political economy. And no group has been more affected than America's farmers and America's farm workers and the people who work in the processing plants that that put together our food. So we've seen radical consolidation of pretty much, every part of the market, in the processing, in retail. Today in America, we got 4 corporations control most of the groceries in this country. That's amazing, from family-owned farm retailing to 4 corporations controlling most of the groceries. We've seen consolidation in supplies. We'll talk probably about fertilizer later today. But the result, the political result, is concentration of power in the hands of the few, and we've seen more than 1 million family farmers driven off the land. Their property taken from them, their livelihoods taken from them. This is a political revolution that has taken place in this country, and no one has done anything about it for 40 years. Last July, though, President Biden did something really amazing. President Biden came out with an executive order that said, we're going to do something about this. And even better than that, he said, we are going to get rid of the philosophy of anti-monopoly that has gotten us into this problem. We're getting rid of the neoliberal thinking. We are getting rid of it absolutely. He said the theories, the ideas of Robert Bork, a second-level intellectual of the last generation, had failed, and we're getting rid of those. So this is a foundation. President Biden has laid a foundation for us to build something radically new. Today we're here to actually see how well his administration is doing thus far in this effort. It's not entirely a pretty picture. We want to be pretty straightforward in our assessments. But one thing that everyone should understand is that this is a discussion among friends. Not everybody in this room is a Democrat, but I think everybody in this room is committed to working constructively with the administration to realize the promise in President Biden's actions last summer and his words last summer, and to rebuild a democracy in our political economy, and most especially in our farm economy. So I'm going to turn it over now to Angela.
Thank you, Barry. I'm Angela Huffman, co-founder and vice president of Farm Action. I want to thank everyone for attending today here in person and on the live stream. I want to thank Open Markets, our partners on hosting this event, and all of our speakers and panelists. Farm Action is a nonpartisan, farmer-led organization. We leverage our research, policy development, advocacy campaigns, and political expertise to create a food and agriculture system that works for everyday people rather than a handful of powerful corporations. Our goal in developing and releasing this midterm report card is to hold federal departments and agencies accountable for implementing the food and agriculture initiatives set out in President Biden's sweeping executive order on promoting competition in the American economy. This is one of the most important actions that we should be undertaking. This executive order represents a once-in-decades opportunity to take action against the corporate power that's driving farmers and ranchers off the land, putting workers in harm's way, closing down small businesses in our rural communities, and leading to fewer choices and skyrocketing prices for all of us who eat. Today, the control over our economy that a handful of corporations maintain is a threat to our democracy and our national security. Often we raise concern about the four-firm concentration ratio, or the CR4, which refers to the market share of the four largest firms in a sector. Experts say that abuses are likely in a market where four companies control 40% or more of that sector. In beef, the CR4 is 85%. In soybean processing, it's 80%. In pork, it's 67%. But this doesn't tell the whole story. It's only the numbers. We want all of you to know why it matters. Today, through a video presentation and a panel of experts, we will be presenting the on-the-ground impacts of this heavy consolidation. We hope that putting faces to the problem will help the leadership and the staff at the DOJ, the FTC, and the USDA to step up and deliver the full vision of the executive order and more for the American people. In the report card we are releasing today, a midterm review of the Biden administration's commitment to food system competition, we acknowledge the agency's successes, and we point out areas that need improvement. Claire Calloway, Food Systems Program Manager for Open Markets Institute, and Sarah Carden, Policy Advocate for Farm Action, will now present our report card.
Hello, everyone. As Angela just said, my name is Claire Calloway. I'm the Food Program Manager for the Open Markets Institute, and I'm here with Sarah to present our organization's report card assessing the Biden administration's progress on addressing issues of corporate consolidation in food and agriculture. We thought this report card was really important to put together because the Biden administration really has a critical window of opportunity to enact what could be transformational policies to ensure more equitable and resilient food systems by breaking up these concentrations of corporate power that we see. The pandemic put the inherent dysfunctions of consolidated food supply chains on display in a way that we haven't seen in years, even decades. It brought much needed media attention to this issue as well as political attention. From many, including the White House. The White House's interest in enhancing fair competition, not just in the food system, but across the entire economy, was articulated most clearly in the executive order promoting competition in the American economy, which was issued early of July of last year. And it describes dozens of directives for numerous government agencies. And today we're here to assess the Justice Department, the Federal Trade Commission, and the USDA's work thus far on fulfilling these objectives and suggestions put forward in the executive order.
So, as Claire mentioned, we are here to present our report, which is assessing the USDA, FTC, and DOJ's progress on the directives related to food and agriculture within the executive order. We have given weighted grades to any measures directly referenced within the order. We relied upon our own combined expertise and feedback from farmers and ranchers within our network to determine which directives would have larger impacts and weighted those measures to reflect our assessment. It is important to note that this is a midterm review. These grades are by no means final, and in fact, the main purpose of this report is to provide these agencies with constructive feedback so that they can improve their performances before the end of the Biden administration's first term. The report is broken down by agency, with each report card followed by an assessment that provides our justification for these grades. Today, we will walk you through these report cards and our thinking behind these grades, and then we look forward to answering your questions. So we will begin with the Department of Justice, which overall we are generally pleased with at this point. They had a little bit of a late start in new leadership, but have since been talking the talk and starting to walk the walk. Mergers that once may have been waved through are now being investigated, such as the investigation of Cargill Continental's joint acquisition of Sanderson Farms, as well as the blocking of U.S. Sugar's acquisition of Imperial Sugar. They are also showing significant grit and determination as they enter their third trial in a tough price-fixing case in which criminal charges have been brought against several leading poultry industry executives. So while we think there's still room for improvement, we are mostly pleased and so are giving them a B for the general call for more vigorous antitrust enforcement. We are also glad to see the DOJ and FTC start their merger review process, although we would like to see them a little bit further along. Merger guidelines are rules that the DOJ and FTC give to the public to help clarify the grounds under which these two regulatory bodies may challenge a merger. To address widespread industry consolidation, the executive order encouraged the DOJ and FTC to review both horizontal and vertical merger guidelines and consider revising. In January, the FTC and DOJ opened a comment period for the public to give their input on these merger guidelines, and then in March, they announced a series of listening sessions in which they would co-host with the FTC, in which they reached out directly to farmers and workers to try to better understand the on-the-ground impacts of these mergers. These are all a good first step, but in the end, opening a comment period is not all that big of a lift. If they can come out and issue strong merger review guidelines, we'll be happy to raise their B- to a grade that reflects the strength of these new guidelines. And finally, because of a lack of information on interagency cooperation, so much of which happens behind the scenes, we have opted not to grade any of the agencies on this measure. That said, we did want to publicly and positively acknowledge the joint portal USDA and DOJ set up for farmers to report unfair practices. So overall, we are generally pleased, but there is still room for significant improvement. Firstly, the DOJ is still sitting on a long overdue investigation into beef cattle market manipulation. Furthermore, Farm Action sent them a letter in December alerting them to suspicious spikes in fertilizer prices that did not reflect production increases. Unfortunately, we have seen no action on this front, and instead, we have seen prices and fertilizer company profits continue to rise. And finally, we have not yet seen any clear indication that they plan to use their legal authority to look back and re-examine problematic mergers of the past. General antitrust enforcement and revising merger guidelines will help to prevent further consolidation, but as we've been discussing, the whole precedent for this executive order as it pertains to food and ag is that our food supply chain is no longer working for America due to unprecedented amounts of consolidation. FTC's jurisdiction only goes so far as retail grocery. DOJ's jurisdiction is much more expansive along the food and ag system, including seeds, inputs, and other critical markets. In order to raise their grade, we would like to see them issuing strong merger review guidelines, releasing and responding to their beef cattle market manipulation report, and using their authority to look back and re-examine problematic mergers of the past, and ultimately breaking up at least one food industry monopoly. Now I'm going to give it to Claire to lead you through our analysis of the FTC.
Yep. And also we'll be taking questions at the end if anyone has any. But moving on to the Federal Trade Commission, there's a slight delay in the slides. But overall, I think we're encouraged by the posture and commitment of new leadership at the Federal Trade Commission to reform our antitrust laws in order to take on more vigorous enforcement, but measuring their words against the actions as laid out in the executive order, especially where it relates to food systems, we think that they've made decent progress, at least given the circumstances. As Sarah mentioned, the FTC has joined DOJ in beginning the process of issuing new merger guidelines. And FTC officials have also shown their commitment to generally increase enforcement. One example being last August, they passed a unanimous policy statement to increase their enforcement of repair restrictions and monopolistic repair tactics. So when companies withhold tools, schematics, anything that's essential to repair a product, thus allowing the manufacturer to essentially monopolize the market for repair of that product. That said, Farm Action, along with National Farmers Union and 6 state-level farmers union, have a complaint in front of the FTC asking that they investigate John Deere in particular for these monopolistic repair restrictions. And so we'd like to see this policy statement turn into enforcement against some of these repair monopolists where proven. And beyond merger enforcement, the Federal Trade Commission also has a lot of authority to issue rules banning deceptive and unfair methods of competition. And the Biden's executive order does direct the agencies to explore this authority. And so when it comes to general rulemaking on, again, deceptive practices and unfair methods of competition, we decided to give the FTC a C to recognize the fact that last August they did pass a rule that was designed to crack down on fraud in products that carry Made in the USA or Made in America labels. This applies somewhat to food where USDA's jurisdiction over country of origin labeling doesn't apply, which we'll talk more about later. But the Commission has also paved the way for further rulemaking by making a working group on this issue. That said, the Open Markets Institute, along with several farmer organizations, have a petition in front of the FTC to ban exclusive dealing, which is a conduct that is quite prevalent in the food and agriculture system and really locks up market access and shuts out competitors. And so we would hope to see the agency act on this petition. The executive order also directed the FTC to make specific rules restricting the use of non-compete agreements, which are employer provisions that prevent employees from working at competing organizations. These are prevalent across the economy, but also in the food system, especially in the fast food industry. And while the agency has indicated that it's interested in this issue and has held a workshop on the topic, we would have hoped that they would have issued a rule or a proposed rule at this point. And so, given this lack of action, we gave the agency a D when it comes to non-competes. However, we recognize that the delay in some of this work is also related to the fact that there was a delay in confirming the 3rd Democratic commissioner. And so, given that overall, we gave the FTC a B-. And to raise their grade, we'd hope that they would both ban non-competes and exclusive dealing by dominant firms, as well as increase their antitrust enforcement against grocery monopolies, including their enforcement of the Robinson-Patman Act, which has been left on the shelf by this agency for quite a few decades now.
Just gonna give the report card a minute. All right. So, as you can all see, we did not give the USDA high marks. After much contemplation and listening to feedback from farmers within our networks, we decided that a D+ was a fair overall grade for the USDA. We appreciate the narrative shift we have seen coming out of the agency and also acknowledge the substantial investments they are making in issues related to competition, but overall we note a serious lack of decisive action and policy change to support their language and investments. It is important to note that this is an assessment of the department and not a reflection of any individual's work. In order to impact competition in a meaningful way, the USDA as an agency has some sizable internal hurdles it must overcome. They face some significant staffing and resource challenges following decades of industry interest successful campaigns to cripple agencies' enforcement capabilities. The USDA's troubling history of operating as a revolving door for industry representatives was highlighted by the recent report issued by the Select Subcommittee on the Coronavirus Crisis, which provided evidence of industry leaders directly influencing USDA policy. So while the USDA's directives may not be as pioneering as some of those issued to the FTC or DOJ, they have some additional challenges that both the agency and the administration must address. The proposed 40% budget increase for the USDA's Packers and Stockyards division in the President's 2023 fiscal budget is a promising start. So now Claire and I will walk you through some of the logic behind the USDA's individual grades. And to start with, I would like to talk about Product of USA, which after careful consideration, we felt we needed to fail. Product of USA labeling is not a new issue, with complaints filed in previous administrations to no avail. This all began in 2015 when Congress repealed mandatory country of origin labeling for beef and pork products, opening the door for meat importers to begin abusing Product of USA labeling. As it stands today, beef and pork products that are raised outside of the U.S. can be imported, repacked in U.S. packing facilities, regardless of their country of origin, and labeled as Product of USA. The executive order directly asks the USDA to initiate a rulemaking to define the conditions under which meat products can be labeled as Product of USA, and yet we have seen hardly any action. In March, FSIS announced that they would begin this review by conducting a public survey of attitudes and values on food labeling, but first they would open a comment period on how the public felt about this survey. This is basically the definition of beating around the bush, which is why we chose to give the USDA an F on the Product of USA category. However, as previously alluded to, it is not all bad news coming out of the USDA. They have committed and begun distributing the $4 billion they received from ARPA to invest in programs that promise to help build competition and resiliency in our food supply chain. These investments include, but are not limited to, $1 billion in supporting small and mid-sized meat processors, $1 billion for other food processors and regional food, business centers, and $500 million supporting domestic fertilizer production. The executive order asks the USDA to produce several reports, including a joint report with the FTC on improving access to retail markets, retail concentration, and the Robinson-Patman Act, an additional report with Commerce on competition and intellectual property in seed industry, and a third addressing alternative food distributions and value-added products. We have seen them issue requests for information in preparation for the first two reports, and furthermore, we were pleased to see them issue a third RFI on competition in the fertilizer industry, in addition to the two they had already issued in competition in retail markets and seed and agrochemical industry. We appreciate the USDA beginning to take initiative on the effects of initiative in the fertilizer industry, as recent global events have highlighted the effects of its severe consolidation. They recently published the last report addressing alternative food distribution systems and value-added products, although it was quite a bit later than its 180-day deadline, and so we gave them a B for its completion. We think this is fair because in addition to the completion of the report, they were asked to address competition through several means of which we have seen little action. Of the 5 suggested ways to support alternative food distribution systems and value-added products, the only one we have seen them making strong headway is in the directive to make financial investments that will bolster competition, such as those investments I previously highlighted. But while we are thrilled to see these investments, many of which we have been advocating for some time, we think it is important to note that these financial investments will only serve as short-term band-aids without strong policy change to support them. For starters, the USDA holds a tremendous amount of purchasing power. We need them to use this power to support their recent investments into independent productions. Programs such as their Local Foods Purchase Assistance Cooperative Agreement Program or their Local Foods for School Cooperative Agreement Program only begin to address a fraction of their purchasing capabilities. The USDA needs to establish clear purchasing targets or set-asides for purchases of food from independent regional producers, foods from socially disadvantaged producers, and foods from organic regenerative farms. Another important area in need of substantial policy updates is the Packers and Stockyards Act, which Claire will now lead you through.
So yeah, as you can see, we gave significant weight to USDA's work issuing rules under the Packers and Stockyards Act, and this is because this is really one of USDA's most broad and powerful authorities that it has to establish fair terms of trade in the proven dysfunctional meat packing sector. Meatpacking is more consolidated today than it was when the Packers and Stockyards Act was initially passed, and many of the unfair and exploitative tactics that were initially banned under the Packers and Stockyards Act continue to persist, and there is a major issue with farmers seeking justice under the act. Packers have used their power to corner market access, to push down prices paid to farmers, and to trap farmers into exploitative take-it-or-leave-it contracts. After decades of industry-friendly decisions in the courts, we also see that it's very hard for Packers or for farmers to challenge Packers for even things like clear retaliation for speaking up against what are violations of the Packers and Stockyards Act. So the executive order encouraged USDA to issue Packers and Stockyards rules addressing 5 different issues, including this issue of retaliation, as well as defining unfair and deceptive practices, and also addressing issues of poultry contracts and payment systems for paying poultry farmers. And we think it's important to recognize that these subjects are not necessarily new issues for USDA. 12 years ago, Secretary Vilsack oversaw a substantially similar rulemaking process, which was ultimately stalled by Congress, partially completed at the tail end of the Obama administration, but only to be overturned by the Trump administration, in part because many of the rules were not finalized. And so part of our poor grade comes from the fact that the agency knows the importance of expediency in issuing these rules and has approached some of these very same subjects of rulemaking in the past, and yet still is slow out of the gate to issue new rules. That said, we did not fail the USDA's work here because the agency has made its rulemaking intentions clear. They've promised 3 rules: one that would settle whether or not farmers need to prove a harm to industry-wide competition in order to bring claims under the Packers and Stockyards Act, another to define these unfair and deceptive practices, and a third to regulate tournaments payment systems in the poultry industry, which have been criticized for unfairly pitting farmers against each other for factors that are often outside of their control and determined by the integrators that they work with. And just 3 weeks ago, the USDA did propose its first of the Packers and Stockyards rules. This one was related to the poultry industry, and it would require more disclosure in poultry contracts and payment systems. And we think this is a very well considered and thorough first rule, and we think it shows a lot of promise for the rules to come. However, the agency has pushed off some of the most important questions that were directed in the executive order and initially promised when it comes to regulating these unfair tournament payment systems, and they've pushed that down into an advance notice for proposed rulemaking. So the current proposal is at best addressing just one part of the 5 different issues that the executive order directed USDA to work on. And so for that reason, given the somewhat slow and incomplete start, we landed on a D for our grade. However, we are optimistic that with swift additional rulemaking, the USDA can turn this around and do right by farmers. Additionally, to raise the grade overall, we'd hope that USDA would strengthen their Product of USA labeling, improve price discovery and transparency in food spot markets, and also identify clear procurement targets that support fair and regional food systems. And with that, we have some time for questions, I believe. I actually don't have a clock, but I think we should have about 10 minutes, or 5. There's a question over here. Oh, we have a microphone, if that would help.
Sure. So do you see what the Biden administration has done so far on competition policy having any concrete impact on the ground so far? And if so, how would you assess that concrete impact so far? I mean, there's a lot of talk and a lot of, motion, but I'm wondering if there's any actual concrete impact so far.
Yeah, I can start. And then, obviously the USDA's investment in these plants has started. There are real businesses that are qualifying to receive these funds, and that would help create more competition and diversity in the supply chain. That said, we have seen a delay in the smallest plants that were promised their own round of funding that has not begun. But still, there are real resources being directed. I think for us, the question is, how are the rules of the marketplace going to change so that these plants actually have a chance at succeeding and changing the competitive dynamics? Our concern is that absent some of these other rulemakings, which I guess, as you noted, they've promised to do but haven't actually enacted, you could see some of the same market dynamics that created the levels of consolidation that we have today and make it so hard for these small plants to succeed. So I guess in summary, there is real resources and real money going to help build up this industry, but I think whether or not that will change the dynamics will depend a lot on the policy that they enact.
Yeah, just to add to that, like Claire said, I mean, really really one of the reasons where we wrote this report is that we are seeing the stage set for some on the ground impacts, but we are looking to push these agencies along so that we can really feel these impacts more strongly. I think yeah. Anyone else?
Hi, I have a follow-up concrete question about fertilizer. We know we have an emergency internationally in here, and you mentioned the $500 million that President Biden has mentioned. If you or anyone here, what is exactly happening with that? Are they giving money to some of the biggies? Because CF Holdings, as you know, it's major news internationally that they're just arbitrarily shutting one of their two biggest fertilizer plants in Britain. I mean, it's obviously an international thing. So what's going on with that $500 million? Excuse me.
I think that's an excellent question, and one that we are all looking forward to learning more details about. In general, we are advocating strongly for these funds to come with certain restrictions, such as some of the language we've seen in the meatpacking funds that would limit access of some of the larger industries to these funds, but I have yet to see the details on what they're doing. I don't know if somebody else has seen those yet, but I haven't seen them yet.
Just to follow up on that question, is there legislation around that as to direct where that money can go?
I know for meat packing, they issued a kind of a request for information to ask for public input on where the money should go, and in the grant making process, there'll be stipulations. So we do have some sense they've put some restrictions on the largest meat packing plants are not, I believe, not eligible for this. And also, one of the concerns we have is, what's stopping these small plants from eventually being acquired by these large funders. And so there have been indications that there would be, clawback or restrictions on plants that received government money from, being acquired by large plants, or those funds would not, or the companies might have to repay back those funds. I forget the exact specifics, but generally, to your question, it's USDA who has been issuing the standards for who receives these funds, as opposed to legislation, but that's okay.
Sarah and Claire, thank y'all for your work on this report card. My name's Trina McClendon, and I am the owner-operator of Trinity Poultry Farm in Southwest Mississippi. So I'm very vested in what's happening with the Packers and Stockyards Act. I have read the proposed rules for poultry growers. It's better than it has been in the past, but it still doesn't go far enough. So my question is, of course, in those rules, it doesn't really address the tournament system, which is very, very unfair. I can give you, for instance, so I'm in a small market. I'm in the Macomb production division of Sanderson. And they decided to pit us against each other just within that market. Normally, I am in competition with Collins and Hazelhurst division, but they decided just to do Macomb. So there's basically 3 growers in my week that I sold. All 3 of us kind of in the poultry industry, we pretty much stay in the same week that we're in. So we kind of know who we're competing against because it really never changes much. So all three of these growers that sold in my week are all very excellent growers, do well as poultry growers. And so what happened, there was only three of us, right? One was above, one was the average, one was below. Now we're all top growers, we all get bonus pay, and suddenly, you know, somebody's below that's in that top. So I can see that these proposed rules are not going to address the situation as farmers need them addressed, as growers need them addressed. And as I looked back at the rulemaking, this started in 2010. Then they went to GIPSA in 2016. All the rules just got shelved. Nothing's been done. So how can we push USDA to not sit these rules on a shelf? So I know there's a comment period, but I would like to see these rules enacted soon because I am waiting to find out whether or not this buyout is going to be allowed to go through. Now, in this buyout, if you're not aware, 2 days after the $4.5 billion announcement was made by Sanderson Farms and Cargill and Continental Grain, they were on my farm giving me a pay decrease, okay, and only for farmers in Mississippi, which is a Sanderson-founded company, is a Mississippi company. So I'm very vested in what's happening here, how we can push, not only as growers, but as reporters and others to get USDA to do their job.
Yeah, I can start. Yeah. Thank you so much for sharing. I think that hopefully was really helpful for the audience to understand some of the unfairness in these tournament payment systems. And yeah, I mean, as you said, there's the transparency rule, but there's also an advance notice for proposed rulemaking that's asking these questions about basically gathering more information about should USDA regulate or even ban the use of the tournament system, as well as other considerations for how farmers are paid. So drawing attention to that comment period, and for sure adding that information is important. And also for farmers who have been experiencing unfairness like you have, reporting it to the USDA and DOJ's joint portal. That's another way that we believe they're collecting evidence to support hopefully stronger rulemakings. But yeah, I mean, to the question of, we gave them a low grade in part because of what you're saying. They have not been acting as swiftly or with the urgency that we think this issue needs. So yeah, I guess just, I do think raising these issues to them is important, covering the delay, covering the opportunities for the advanced notice of rulemaking. But I don't know if Sarah has anything else to. Okay.
Yeah. Thank you, Trina.
Yeah, thank you.
I think we have time for one more question.
I'm going to piggyback on what this nice lady said about delay. We have learned in the last year that our government can be nimble when it finds it necessary. And every day that the USDA delays, another farmer goes out of business. So we need to get in my opinion, we need to kick the USDA and say, no, you can't do this anymore. As with the Product of the USA, to have another survey. So maybe I don't know what the action is, but we'll support any action where we say when you get these directives out there, there's a timeline. And if you don't, then you have to have consequences for your actions. So I'm just hopeful that with all of the wonderful work that you all have done, that we can put a timeline on these things. We started the Product USA in 2018. She started her product in 2010. This is ridiculous. Thank you.
Yeah. So I think with that, we're going to go on to a video that Dee from Farm Action will open up for us.
I'll keep it pretty brief here today. Y'all are not here to see me, but just want to give a couple, just a little bit of framing to understand, who you're going to hear from in just a minute. So even if you yourself are not a farmer or rancher, everyone in this room, as people who eat, we are all impacted by the levels of concentration our food system has reached. Many of us here today could cite facts and figures about how this situation came to be, which specific policies enabled the corporate takeover of our dairy, our fertilizer, our cattle, our grocery retail sectors. But it's one thing to know what led to the consolidation that is stealing economic opportunity and draining the population from rural America, and it is quite another thing to know exactly what it feels like to watch your neighbors' houses being bulldozed one by one as their farms are swallowed up by corporate ventures. So in this short video, which I'm about to play, you'll hear 10 voices describing what it's like to live, work, and try to earn a fair wage in a system controlled by a few powerful corporations. Each one of these speakers is positioned at a different place, a different link along the supply chain. So you'll hear from a vegetable producer facing more burdensome pricing regulations than the corporation she's struggling to compete with, a dairy farmer whose peers are forced to accept prices that are 25 to 30% lower than the cost of their production, a rancher whose grass-fed market is being stolen out from under her by the deceptive practices of consolidated corporations, and a few more. These folks' lived experiences can convey with so much more urgency and detail than I ever could exactly why competition reform is so important. So let's go ahead and watch.
We farm the major three commodities: soybean, wheat, and corn. We don't have a public grain elevator. So the only place for us to sell our grain now is either to Smithfield or to Purdue. There is very little market for small scale family farmers, especially minority farmers, due to these consolidations. They basically, dictate when we can harvest and when we can sell and what the price is. If we have Cargill, which is this mega company already, and Continental Grain acquire Samson, it just further consolidates and makes it challenging for our farmers, our growers and producers to be able to get a fair price. These companies already have a history of price fixing. These are not good actors. And so they pretty much set the price, and they work with each other to keep it where they're still profitable and the farmers are indebted to them. We want to have a free and fair market. That's what the United States is about. And that's what farmers are about.
Well, the area was a lot different whenever I was growing up. We had neighbors close to us, and everybody knew one another. It thrived. The community thrived, with the uncertainty and often on the farm, especially in the last 7 to 8 years where we're out here and we're not guaranteed of covering the cost of production. So a lot of farmers either went broke or decided to quit. I've seen the number of farms diminish greatly. We've had the big farmers getting bigger. The big, they don't rely on the local businesses to keep their operation going. It takes away from the county revenue, and so our schools are consolidating. We had a grocery store in Golden City that disappeared. We had lots of things for kids to do. There was movie theater, that's gone. Used to, if you was driving down the road and you saw a neighbor having problems with changing a tire or something like that, you automatically stopped in and helped them out. As it changed, why most of the people just drive by as fast as they can go by.
Now these are just mega CAFOs, 10 to 20 houses, 600 to 650 foot long barns. You're talking bigger than football fields, right up against a neighbor's home. Here in Delaware, we are number one in the entire country with 97% of our rivers and our streams polluted. We have communities now that are facing massive well contamination. And with that, health impacts, birth defects, miscarriage after miscarriage, animals having seizures. Because there is so much power consolidated, it is almost impossible to get any type of meaningful legislation enforcement because the scales are tilted. It's just too much power.
The particular hog CAFO that I visited was located in Sampson County, North Carolina. One of them would say, okay, salta, súbete, jump. They would all jump up on the rails, the pens. From the bottom of the pens, this liquid would come up. It was a pink, slimy kind of a liquid right up on top of the workers, splashing. That was the chemical that they used to clean the pens. And I remember talking to them like, what is this stuff? Nobody knew. And then that liquid would go out into the lagoon. Their housing was just right up the hill from the lagoon. They're drinking water, they're bathing themselves. Almost every one of them, if not all of them, had stomach problems. I would ask them, do you have concerns? And folks would say, yes, but what can I do? And the only other options there in that area was another CAFO down the road. As a farmer, you don't have too much choice. The corporation has certain requirements. If you don't do them, you don't have the contract. Whatever happens to you, the farmer, and whatever happens to you, the worker, that's not their problem. They just want their money. That's it. The folks that are making money from these operations, they're not in those communities. They're not living where there's, where you can't go outside because of the smell in the air and the amount of flies. The only people that are left there are the ones that can't leave. And those are the disposable people. And that's going to be the poor, people of color, and the workers.
There's a huge frozen pizza business here in Wisconsin. And so we hear from cheese processors, okay, the pizza factory is expanding. It needs to get bigger to be able to sell to the increasingly consolidated retail sector. So they need more cheese. And so they're going to expand the cheese factory to match the pizza factory's scale. Then the company that handles our milk wants to look for bigger farms because it's efficient for them to try to get that milk from fewer places. Our suppliers, they react to these larger farms and larger firms by coming to us and saying, hey, I had to give a volume discount on your bull semen for artificial insemination to the big farm because I was going to lose their business, but now I need to make up that cost. And so I'm going to raise the price to you, and you're smaller, so you're not really going to be able to push back. So this creates this cascading effect. The latest statistics show that in Wisconsin, just since January 2022, we've lost 127 dairy farms. They've gone out of business. So that's almost one a day.
The corporate consolidation that has happened within organic dairy in the last 10 years has resulted in a lack of competition. The two largest buyers in the country are creating a price structure that is driving small to mid-sized organic dairy farms out of business. In the last year, Danone International unilaterally cancelled the contracts on 89 organic dairy farm families in the Northeast. You look in the countryside, and where there was a collection of different lights from farms, at 4 in the morning, you could see the barns light up. Now you don't see that. If we are to succeed in the future, then we need to sustain the small to mid-sized operations that truly reflect organic production and provide the consumer with a product that they can trust.
Product of the USA label. You'll go in the grocery store and see that on almost everything. To get that label, all you need to do is do something to that piece of meat in this country. You can just take the packaging off, cut it up, or grind it and label it product of the United States. People can't distinguish our American product from that imported product. Research has shown that people would preferentially buy American beef, grass-fed beef, but they can't identify it. We're losing out on a huge section of that retail dollar that would make ranchers profitable. Being able to get a fair price for our product is so key to the survival of farming and ranching in this country.
Farmers don't have the right to repair their equipment because they can't get access to all of these software and tools they need to fix their modern tractors. It means they're tied to the dealership for many repairs, which leads to long repair delays that can put crops at risk, not to mention high repair costs that cut into already razor-thin margins. Consolidation is making the problems of repair restrictions worse. John Deere, who's the largest manufacturer of large equipment in the United States, is the worst at this. And that means that there's one John Deere dealership for every 5.3 million acres of American farmland, or every 12,018 American farms. For Iowa farmer Ken Heltz, that meant that he had to go all the way to Nebraska in order to diagnose a problem with his Deere tractor's transmission. And because he didn't trust his local dealership, he had to drive all the way to Missouri to get it fixed. If we pass right to repair and we're able to cut through this dealership consolidation, that first of all means that farmers will be able to get faster service, that they'll be able to fix their own tractors, that they'll be able to save money on repair. It also means that the local jobs that repair provides can come back to Main Street and that farmers can have multiple different businesses to choose from.
Well, you know, you're dead in the water if you can't pay for the seed. But then that's not the only thing you got to pay for that is very expensive. Your fertilizers, I mean, your drip lines, your plastic, your pipe, all of that has increased and it almost has priced them out. It is very difficult for a small farmer to compete with the mega, I call it the mega farms. You can't do it. And most of the time when you go in and you buying produce from these large corporations, you're really not buying fresh. It's been there for a while. They do not have a cap on what they want to sell their produce for. To sell at a farmer's market, you have to follow the state guidelines. You cannot price gouge. It's what they call it. What they really want us to do is to do all of this work, harvest, clean, prepare our produce and sell it for less than what you can go in the grocery stores and buy. See, that's what happens with us as small farmers. We go out there and we put ourselves in debt, trusting that we will be able to grow more this year, harvest more, sell more, get a better price this year. And when that don't happen, we end up head over heel in debt and we lose everything we ever tried to own.
The ranch has changed a lot. When I was a kid, we had chickens, sheep, hogs, and cattle. And as the profits went away in those industries, I guess we're left with the cattle. Since 1980, we've lost about 70% of independent feedlots that used to bid for my cattle. You know, it used to be if you could get one load of cattle together, a whole semi-load, that's what buyers like to buy. But now with the concentration and the bigger feedlots, you know, it might take maybe 4 loads is that sweet spot. I'm the 4th generation here, and for 3.5 generations, you know, agriculture's never been easy. Droughts, floods, blizzards, they fought that and they managed to survive because they had a market. But if we don't get this concentration under control, the result is going to be less choices for consumers, less quality. There's going to be fleeting availability and higher prices. There's a lot of work ethic and a lot of entrepreneurship out here in rural America. And if we can make a living wage, we'll keep America fed.
I'd like to go ahead and invite the panelists to step up here while I thank Open Markets and Farm Action for putting together this morning's assessment of the progress of the Biden administration on their executive order against anti-monopoly, which attracted our attention, which raised many hopes, and which needs to be assessed in order to gauge whether that is public relations or whether there is intent. And so I also want to thank Open Markets and Farm Action for putting together this additional set of experts in addition to the folks whom we've already heard from, so that they can continue to tell us from their perspective what the effects of monopoly concentration is throughout the entire value chain. We will have a couple of farmers who will tell us about what it's like on the production side. We will have someone who will tell us what it's like in the food chain. And we will have finally someone who will tell us what it's like at the retail end of the food system. So without further ado, let me just point out that we have about 1 hour left in the program. We have 4 speakers. You can do the math with me. They know that we will be asking them for about 10 minutes of their concentrated wisdom, and hopefully we will have about 10 minutes for your questions of them after we get through with that. So in addition to the logic that I just described to you of traversing the food chain, as we've seen in the video, in the 21st century, we also need to consider the perspective of social and racial equity in the agricultural system. So I would like to give the first word to Mr. John Boyd, the founder and president of the National Black Farmers Association.
Good morning, everybody. Oh, we can do just a little bit better than that. Good morning, everybody. Good morning. All right, there you go. First of all, I'd like to thank my colleagues for putting on this awesome discussion that I believe is long overdue in the agriculture industry. So can we please give a round of applause for those all that were involved in putting on this report card. The many voices that you heard in the video, I thought was excellent how they selected the various voices that we heard this morning. I would like to talk a couple of things. One about, of course, competition. The issue of Cargill, I believe, gets an F-. The report card was too nice to Cargill. You want to be the largest food company in the world. You want to control fertilizer, the grain market. But you don't want to tell America how every farmer is going to be a part of that particular process. So when we continue at the National Black Farmers Association to challenge, and I'm actually opposed to it in writing to the Department of Justice, who I haven't heard back from yet. When we challenge these companies, they immediately go out and find a black face and run a television commercial that, oh, we've changed the way that we look, but you haven't changed the way that you do business. That's what's wrong with large-scale companies that continue to want to come to get larger and larger, but the actual farmers themselves, they take away the choice and they take away the voice of not only black farmers, but the American farmer in this country. Large-scale farmers should be opposed to it too. They're taking away their voice as well. And you heard someone touch on John Deere. I believe get an F-, in which we've challenged the way that John Deere services black farmers. For example, I am a 4th-generation farmer, and next year I will be celebrating my 40th year as a farmer in this country, producing food for America. Somebody should say something. 80 seasons, and I've seen a lot of things happen and change in those 80 seasons, but the Department of Agriculture certainly hasn't changed the way that they do business. But John Deere, after we challenged John Deere, we actually boycotted John Deere because of the lack of service towards black farmers. For example, I've been experiencing some of that type of discrimination in my own county, where they choose the words, well, John, there are other farmers that we have to keep going and keep their machinery going, and we'll get to you when we can. What is that to say to a farmer? That your farming operation isn't just as important as that other farmers in the particular county that they're speaking of. People, that's wrong. And when you remain silent in the midst of wrongdoing, you've become just as guilty as the company itself who's doing the discrimination. We have to come together in this country as farmers and producers and organizations and bring this country back together by the same seam in which it has become divided. The most racist part of this country is in rural America. Oh yes, I'm going there this morning. The Trump flag flying high, Confederate flags flying high. Black people on one side, white people on the other. In the past 10 or 12 years, America has become more divided because we're not having real conversations like this. People, we got to come together if we're going to overcome the challenges that we already face as farmers in this country. $6 diesel fuel prices. $6 diesel fuel prices for every farmer that rolls up to the diesel pump. $1,040 for a ton of fertilizer. I was paying $400 for last year. And my local dealer says, you know what? You won't even be able to get that on time this year, John. You won't be able to get more, I won't have any more fertilizer until May because the bigger boys came and bought it all up when they heard about the shortage. We're in a crisis in America for farmers. Yes, I said it. There are going to be empty shelves in American supermarkets in the coming months. Somebody's going to find a farmer. There's going to be higher food costs for every American family. Somebody's going to look for a farmer. So my message today is speak out against large-scale corporate America. They're wrong, they're greedy, they're price gouging. All of these companies are doing that right now. They're taking advantage of America's farmers at the weakest time in history for America's farmers instead of helping them up. I know it's going to make some people mad. That's not what I'm trying to do. I'm simply trying to raise the visibility of what these companies continue to go underneath the radar screen. The Department of Justice gets an F. They continue to allow these companies to get bigger and bigger and take away the choice and the selection, whether it be Bayer, whether it be Monsanto, whatever you want to call them now, whether it's John Deere. All of these companies right now should be coming to the aid of America's farmers and not stepping on them. So I'm going to close right there. And I would also like to recognize my beautiful wife, Carol, who puts up with me every day. I'm not the easiest man to live with. And she does a great job of advocating for America's Native American farmers. And my good friend, Ricardo, hats off to him. This guy is a class act, people. I'd like for you to give him a round of applause. We go a long, long way. And all of our panelists that you're going to hear from today, thank you very, very much for having me. And I look forward to your questions.
I knew we could count on John to get our blood flowing. Let's stay with producers, and I'd like to invite now Carrie Balcom, who is the Executive Director of the American Grass-Fed Association, to follow up.
Thanks, John. That was a hard act to follow. My name is Carrie Balcom, and I'm the Executive Director of the American Grass-Fed Association, and we represent producers of bison, beef, lamb, goat. We also have dairy standards for grass-fed dairy, and we also have standards for pork. Now it's pastured. A little history about me is that I grew up in a little small town in rural South Florida called Immokalee, and for those of you who have not heard of Immokalee, you've heard of the Coalition of Immokalee Workers. Well, the idyllic life that I lived in the 50s in Immokalee was a hell of a lot different than the idyllic life that's there now. Progress in Immokalee now is building another dollar store. The big chains of grocery came in. Of course, it's no longer the family-centric rural America that I grew up with. It's all the money is taken out of the community now and not put back in the community, even with the focus on that little community. It's just not happening. And what John said is that they're talking about us and not to us. We started in 2003 when the USDA was going to put out a grass-fed label claim that said you could feed your animals 20% grain, give them antibiotics and hormones, confine them, and call it grass-fed. We fought back until 2007, and then we started our own certification program. That was 19 years ago. In 2018, with the help of Joe Maxwell and his team, we filed a petition with the USDA to change the policy, not the legislation, on product of the USA. That was in 2018. Joe Biden and his administration put it in the executive order last July. We now have a survey asking people what they think about it. Okay. This nice lady started in 2010. I don't know about you, but if somebody in my family delayed that long, to use my mother's term, they'd be snatched bald-headed. So I'm just trying to say is that we've got to change the way we do business with the USDA. We can no longer allow them to get away with this delay. Every day we delay, another farmer goes out of business. Another farm is bought up. Another farm is somehow indoctrinated in this corporate mentality. The release of funds it's wonderful to get the press release that they've released funds, $1 billion here, $1 billion there, $500 million here, $500 million there. But when you drill down on how that money is released, a lot of times the small farmers cannot apply for it. They're not eligible to apply for it. We need oversight. And who is to do that oversight? I know everyone in this room took time off from their regular lives and their regular phones and their regular emails to come here to change that. But who do we hold accountable? These are questions, not answers, so we're looking for them. The USDA purchasing, we need guidelines from USDA purchasing to make sure that our farmers have the opportunity to come together to build aggregate supply to be able to apply for those contracts, because right now they cannot. In the mid-1994, 1995, we worked with the school lunch program. And I asked the lady in charge of the school lunch program, I said, if I got a carload of Colorado lamb, can I sell it into the school system? She said, well, if your paperwork's right, sure, but you can't do it because you have to have 10 carloads of lamb to sell it, to buy into that program. We need to unconsolidate the school lunch program and other things so that people can buy local food to put in their local schools. Recently, there's one thing that really bothered me and should bother all of you, is that a major retailer in the United States, 2 studies came out that the products that they were selling that said raised without antibiotics tested for antibiotics. What has been done about it? This is a major retailer who purports to be local, purports to be all of these things, and yet nothing has been done about it. Or has something been done about it? We don't know. Truth in labeling. The labeling laws or requirements or policies in this country are absolutely crazy. Product with USA is just the fact that you can take a carcass off of a cargo ship in a port on the East Coast, repackage it, and send it all over the country and call it product with USA is just demeaning to every American family farm and farmer and to the American public. And I'm part of the American public and part of the American family farm. So there's also truth in menu. There is no truth in menu, none. You go into a restaurant and it says local. What does that mean? And trust me, you do not want to go out to lunch or dinner with Mike Kellicrate, because he will make the chef come out and tell you where that food comes from. And I think every one of us should do that. And that's something that we need to work on. The niche markets that we all purport to be part of have now been co-opted by corporate agriculture. We no longer have niche markets. Grass-fed, all those other just labels out there are now just labels, because they take them and they run with them, and we lose in the meantime. So we're changing the way, like John said, you're changing the way you look, but they're not changing the way you act. And I've been with AGA since it started in 2003, and I'm going to stay here until we get some major changes. We see the Biden administration with the executive order. We all danced around, and we were also thrilled that when we got Product USA and those other things. But if you see from the report card, it's not good outlook. And this delay, hoping we'll go away. I'm not going away, you know. People ask me when I'm going to retire. From what? Life? You know, talking to Ricardo, listening to John. No, I'm not going to do that. So if you need me to keep coming to Washington, I will, but I'd rather them come to me. So, thank you.
Thank you very much, Carrie. We're going to continue now into the food chain, and we're going to be hearing from Dennis Olson, who's the Senior Research Associate and Policy Analyst of the United Food and Commercial Workers International Union. Dennis?
Thank you, Ricardo, and thanks Open Markets and Family Farm Action, or Farm Action, for having me here today and for having all of you here today. I wanted to pick up on the theme that John mentioned about that we really need to have everybody working together here, because as we've all heard, we are facing these sprawling global corporations that just have really unlimited power in so many ways. And I'm thinking, one of the things I think about in my work that I've thought about is, how did we pass the New Deal? So back in the 30s, how did FDR pass that? Well, one of the ways he passed that was with a farmer-labor alliance, right? And the three pillars of that farmer-labor alliance was a fair price for farmers through a farm bill with supply management that sets a fair price in the market, and antitrust enforcement to curtail the predatory practices that we're talking about today. But the other pillar of that was the bedrock labor laws of this country. That was the first time in history that the United States of America actually recognized the human rights of workers to organize a union. And we had 30% unemployment, we had millions of more farmers, and people were militant, but there were a lot more of us then. A lot more farmers, they were more progressive, more militant, and a lot more workers who were really hungry and out of work. And so that unification allowed a movement that enabled FDR to lead the charge on passing the New Deal. And unfortunately, we actually have been working on a farmer-labor alliance for a long time now with Joe and Barry and others all along, but I don't think that a farmer-labor alliance today is enough. We're not as strong as we were back then, neither of us, and even though it's a potent combination now, we need other allies. And so one of the angles that we took on this was to work on what's called the Good Food Purchasing Policy that deals with the school lunch program, that expands that coalition to other values like environmental sustainability, racial equity, healthy food for kids, animal welfare, and then also valued workforce that includes both farmers and workers. And that program has now been expanded for the last 10 years into 58 major public institutions. And it's been slow and grueling progress, but we've done it. So I just wanted to mention that and say we got to come together and not allow the divide and conquer that the other side has worked so well against us. I want to turn back then to sort of today's topic and give a little bit of history of UFCW. So and our engagement in this. So UFCW has 1.3 million members in the US and Canada, about 250,000 in meatpacking and food processing, and another million or so in retail, and mostly retail groceries. And I'm going to go back to 2010, and many of you in this room were around then when the Obama administration came in with an unprecedented investigation into whether or not we needed more antitrust enforcement in this country. And UFCW mulled that over, and we came in because it was focused exclusively at the beginning. It was really focused only on agricultural markets, not USDA and the Justice Department, not on retail markets. So we were worried about that, and so we engaged. We turned out at all those meetings and supported farmers' right to a fair price. But we also came in with the caveat that we were demanding that the Obama administration bring the FTC to the table to investigate the rise of Walmart's buyer power. Because in 1988, Walmart wasn't even selling groceries, and by this time in 2010, they'd grown to control 25% of the national retail grocery market and were bigger than their next three competitors combined. And so our concern was, how much did that rise of Walmart's unprecedented buyer power drive consolidation further up the supply chain? So for example, Tyson Foods, the biggest meat processor in the United States, at that time was selling about $13 billion worth of meat every year to Walmart, which was 15% of their sales. So we were concerned that, and of course, what we're concerned, to what degree can Walmart squeeze Tyson, who then can turn around and squeeze farmers and kind of make up for it. And so we were concerned if the antitrust actually succeeded and got fair prices to the farmer, that Tyson would turn around, and we didn't fix Walmart's buyer power, that they would turn around to us in the bargaining table and say, well, you're going to have to take less. So that's how we positioned ourselves. People who know who followed that know what happened. It was a good run. We actually got the FTC in at the end of that, but it was too little too late, and the backlash was already starting, and the Obama administration withered in the backlash of the industry. After that, Amazon merged with Whole Foods. We opposed that merger because we saw the concern of Amazon being a disruptor in other sectors, and we were concerned about that in retail grocery. And just more recently, right before COVID, we filed a petition with other unions to have the FTC investigate anti-competitive practices and specifically wage suppression by Amazon. So there is that angle. But I also want to then sort of pick up the story after the collapse of the 2010 initiative. If you fast forward to the drought of 2010 and 11, we got hit, right between the eyes, because about that time we got word from one of our locals in Texas that Cargill's Plainview, Texas plant was closing down 2,000 union scale jobs, Cargill beef plant, because they ran out of cattle because of the drought. And we were able to go in and file a trade adjustment assistant petition under that and prove that beef imports contributed significantly to the shutdown of that plant. 9 other beef plants were shut down, or 8 other beef plants were also shut down in the wake of that drought. And that was really a wake-up call for us. And that's when we really regrouped after, in the wake of the 2010 hearings, and came out very strongly for country of origin labeling, for antitrust enforcement, because in the wake of that drought, by 2014, the U.S. cattle herd fell to its lowest level since 1914, and that was what was the cause of these shutdowns of the plant. And beef prices went to record highs, and poultry production, which was much more nimble, it takes 2 months for poultry from egg to slaughter compared to 2 years for beef. They were able to ramp up production faster than beef, and beef prices had went to record highs. So poultry took market share away from beef. And that's a problem for us because we're at 71%, we were at that time at 71% union density in pork. And union density is a very good measure of labor standards, because the more union density we have, the stronger contracts we can negotiate with the companies. And so we're 71% union density in pork, 62% in beef, but only 33% in poultry, because it's in the former slaveholding South, and it's brutal to try to organize a union in the southern United States. And that was the reality of that. And so if you take a look at that, that Cargill beef plant was producing X million pounds of beef with high labor standards, and it shut down. And in effect, poultry ramped up production and displaced that production with low labor standard poultry production. So poultry is our nemesis. Poultry is dragging down labor standards across all 3 protein sectors. And last year we updated our density numbers, and pork has fallen since 2010 up to last year from 71% to 64%, beef from 62% to 57%, and chicken went down 33 to 31%. So that's what we're saying. It's like, it doesn't matter if you're in a chicken processing plant or a pork processing plant, you still have a stake in the rebuilding of the cattle herd. And that's why we came out in support for these measures to get farmers, ranchers in particular, a fair price for their cattle, because we have to start rebuilding the cattle herd in the United States. And from our perspective, we need to do it from a labor standards perspective, but there's also the issue of climate. And I just want to read you a quote from the Daily Livestock Reported, and I'll close with that. The increase in imports from beef imports from Brazil has been truly astounding. According to the weekly USDA update, through the third week of May 2022, imports from Brazil were 71,800 million tons, 61 million tons higher than a year ago, and almost a six-fold increase. This supply only covers imports from fresh frozen beef. In the first quarter, imports of processed beef represented another almost 20,000 million tons, 45% higher than a year ago. Brazil enters the U.S. under a 65,000 million ton quota. So this is with a tariff. Brazil has increased the imports that much. So the climate argument here is if we don't rebuild the U.S. cattle herd and we dump our beef demand along with China onto Brazil, that is going to, and there's nothing to stop the JBSs of the world or even the Tysons and the Cargill from relocating in Brazil. Because so they don't care if we have a cattle herd, right? If the poultry supply chain is the most exploitive supply chain here, that's what they're going to do, because they're in all three, right? They're in poultry, pork. There's kind of a fake competition going on here among the different meats, right? And so they don't care if they can relocate their beef plant in Brazil and expand that herd into the rainforest. They're good with that. And so back to the theme of unity, I think in order for us to win this fight, we need to convince the climate movement that they need to get involved on this and take a stand in favor of sustainable agricultural production. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dennis. So in spite of the very substantive topics that we've heard so far, most of what we've heard about is completely invisible to the majority of eaters in this country, as you know. But where they do see the food system is at retail. And so we're going to end our sequence of panelists with Michael Gay, who's the owner and manager of Food Fresh Market of Claxton, Georgia. Michael?
How's the saying go? You save the worst for last? Is that how it goes? Anyway, thanks for having us here today. Just to touch on some of the stuff that these guys have been talking about and why the antitrust Robinson-Patman stuff is so important to the end consumer. It's no secret out there that there's some big box chains that pull prices that I just can't get. My warehouse is even, when they go to the table to go, hey, we'll buy at whatever level we need to buy it to get that price. They're told no, that's not feasible. And so obviously it hits our consumers a little harder. And so the prevailing argument's always been that, well, that's a good thing for the consumer, so we're going to let this ride. We're not going to put antitrust stuff onto it because at the end of the day, the consumer wins in pricing. And that's not entirely correct. They do win in the short run. A certain sector of customers, whoever shop at those big box stores, yes, they get lower prices. An overwhelming majority of the rest of the consumers don't get those prices. And in many peer-reviewed, independent studies, when those big box stores push out competition, their prices go up in those areas. And so in the short run, yes, some people may see some lower prices. But in the long run, has anybody ever heard of a monopoly that does the right thing when they come into power? Is that in the history of all of our stuff? No. And that's why these rules even existed, because there were monopolies that were in power that weren't playing by the right rules, and then they were so bad at doing their job that when the rules came into place and things became fair, they went out of business because they didn't know how to run their business correctly without the overwhelming power of just being a monopoly. So enforcement of the Robinson-Patman Act for us and for all these guys up here is going to keep all of these farms open. It's going to keep me being able to stay open. And in reality, when guys like me go out of business and these guys go out of business, it's all the local stuff goes out of the way, and then you're forced that if anything goes wrong, like take Abbott for example right now, they close the plant down. That plant produced 25% of the formula that the United States uses. So when that thing closes down, there's kids dying right now because that plant's closed down, because we've let consolidation happen to that level that if anything goes wrong in that chain, there's nowhere out. When he doesn't have a farm or they don't have cows anymore, there's no other way. If their farm goes up, there's no food left because nobody's growing it. And so again, on my side of that, you know, as the dollar stores move into smaller areas and they don't carry any fresh product, you know, and independents end up closing, you know, no big box stores go into a small town to build a store. It's not profitable for them there. But yeah, I'll get a phone call from the government going, hey, we'll give you money to go back into a place and open a store back up just so you can be profitable. Well, just enforce the rules that already exist, and we won't have to spend that money as taxpayers to pay me to go back and open a store up that we already closed. So, you know, this is all simple stuff. I guess here, obviously, it's very self-serving for us, or it seems that way. But just look at history. We're right on the path again of letting monopolies come into force, and all we're trying to do is show you, here's what's coming. Yes, it may look bad that we're the ones telling you, but this is what we do for a living every day, so we can see it a little more obviously than everybody else. And so we're on that path of monopolies coming into power again, and I can tell you they're not going to do the right thing. And so we're just trying to get that stopped before it becomes a problem, and then there's no way out for us. Then or we're going to have to spend tons of money for him to open his farm back up, or for me to open a store in a food desert where people don't have any access to fresh meat and produce anymore. So, you know, we're just here trying to show that side of the story and hope that you guys understand that, you know, we are fighting for the greater good, not just for ourselves. Thank you.
I want to thank everybody on the panel, and because I shared with you the arithmetic of the remaining hour, you can all appreciate that one of the ways that you can recognize actual experts is that they give you a graduate education clearly and succinctly, and so they've generally left 30 minutes for us to interact as a group. So I'd like to invite you to take advantage of the expertise that you just heard a small sample of, to ask any questions, clarification, push the conversation farther. And I'll just thank you all again for giving me the easiest moderation job ever. The hardest part of this job is trying to cut off very wise people, and there was no chance that that was going to happen here today. So if you have any questions, raise your hand, wait for the microphone, and make sure that we know who you're directing your question to.
John, a question for you. As a poultry grower in Mississippi, I am currently, because of what happened with Sanderson in Mississippi, trying to organize the poultry growers and form the Mississippi Poultry Growers Alliance. Trying to find board members has been very hard, and I've been trying to find black board members, and here in Mississippi, where you think there would be plenty of black poultry growers, there are not. So I guess my question to you is, do you have any black poultry growers that are part of your organization, and can you get me in touch with some of them?
I don't need a microphone. I'll be glad to put you in touch with our black poultry growers. And I was personally a poultry farmer with Purdue for about 12 years. And it's almost like contract slavery, you know.
Well, I say we're tenant farmers, right?
Yes.
I mean, I'm a babysitter for chickens for 60 days, and I treat it like a tenant farmer. And you got poultry out here, which is the big guy, like in the 1930s, and then you got all the growers underneath that.
Yes, where the companies want more and more from the actual producer, and they provide less and less of the actual contract. So yes, we definitely need to organize around that industry and become a real voice.
Well, I would love to get with you and let's move forward so we can organize growers.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. And John, sorry that there was a lag with the microphone. Our tech really needs you to speak into your microphones for the online folks.
Is it working?
Next question.
Hi, my name is Lorette Pachano with the Rural Coalition. And I think I'm asking all the panelists, what can we do on more unity, the farm labor connections that are happening, that need to happen? You know, I'm thinking of right before the pandemic started, we were down in South Florida in Immokalee visiting with Cristobal, a farm worker we've known for a long time who, you know, was bitten by a snake, which caused him to lose his teeth. There's like this the huge orange plantations down there. And like he got paid, I think, $12 per ton of oranges, $48 for a full day of work after traveling all over. And, you know, it's just, astounding, the conditions. And then beyond that, it's the concentration of the market and the concentration of the land. And then Barbara Shipman is one of my board members who was talking from Alabama, was one of the presenters talking about the competition in vegetables. And I was just down visiting her house in May. And she's a Gulf War veteran, she's an Army veteran, she's a 5th-generation farmer, and she lives in this very small community of Araton, which is where the cotton plantations used to be. They call it the Governor's Trail. It's where George Wallace was, and West Point Pepperell and all the textile people moved out, and now it's chicken houses. She has a chicken house right up the hill from her organic garden. She said, yeah, my husband was out in the barn, and I looked, and there was a huge 12-foot boa constrictor, and that snake had my husband's foot in its mouth. And they're coming from where the chicken plants are, where it's mostly Hispanic workers. Barbara has adopted the small school there. She knows there's 356 kids. She has land she calls cottage house. She brings them out. They do gardens in the summer. She's a major force. She said we need them in the community. But I'm also thinking about, the workers know they have snakes around where the poultry houses are. And what do we do about the whole issue of there's no workers' compensation in most of the country? And if workers are not protected, we see it in the dairy industry. One woman with Alianza Campesinas had a cow fall on her, without getting a transport to the hospital. The working conditions are horrible. We also, I think, have to think of other things we can do to rebuild the rural communities. They need community facilities in these communities. And, they have to drive 30 miles to the grocery store. And so I think all of these pieces, how do we weave them together to make a better future for the farmers, for the workers, and for the rural communities?
Thank you very much, Laurette. So here's a question that Laurette addressed to each of you. The root of it is that there is not the same protection in terms of occupational safety and health for folks on the farm, farmers and farm workers, that people who work in white-collar jobs just expect as a part of their employment conditions. There's some interesting history behind that, which our panelists, I'm sure, will be able to amplify on. So, Carrie, why don't we start with you and then go across the table?
Well, the majority of our farmers and ranchers that we work with in the grass-fed industry are independents. There is very little consolidation, aggregation, or anything because they want to and there is no movement to aggregate us. As far as the barriers to health care, the majority of our producers is that one family farm member works off farm to have health insurance. We're trying to cure that by offering health insurance through our organization for those people. As far as the farm workers that you're talking about, the tomatoes, the watermelons, the cantaloupe, the cucumbers and all those things, is that's controlled by a different market, and Dennis and John would be better served to answer that one. As far as independent ranchers, again, at this point, the majority of those are helped by either some type of subsidy or off-farm employment. So that they have health coverage. But as far as the other thing about consolidation is that one of the best things that AGA ever did when we started out was to get in touch with people like Barry's group, Joe's group, other groups, and we don't work in a vacuum. We're not a silo. We need to consolidate our forces together to make a better voice, because big ag is big ag for a reason, and we're all trying to do this, and it's a funny little saying is that I don't want to be the Roman Empire because it was divide and conquer. I want to be the Air Force, cooperate and graduate. So let's be the Air Force.
Yes.
Your turn.
And Laurette, thank you for that question, and thank you for your years of leadership for speaking out on this ugly issue. And the part that's difficult for these kind of discussions is we never get to the farm workers because we have all these other big, massive issues that we're faced with. Mm-hmm. We've got to do something in this country to get fair pay for farm workers that are out here doing the hard work. Mm-hmm. Farming is the absolute hardest occupation known to man. And the persons that come here to do the work the seasonal workers, Hispanic, the migrant workers, whatever the correct definition is. We have to make sure if they do the work, their pay is equal to the work. Simple as that. And we have to make sure, we have to be the enforcer. It's not going to be the United States Department of Ed. It's not going to be some government entity. It's going to be people like me and you in this room to help make that happen. And I have to touch on the $5 billion debt relief that I missed in my talking points. Here we have, I worked on that measure, and the Red and other groups supported that measure that finally happened after 30 years of advocacy. We were able to secure $5 billion in debt relief, $4 billion in debt relief, $1 billion for outreach and technical assistance. And then we were sued by primarily large-scale white farmers in 12 different complaints in federal court blocking the payments to these farmers of color, Black, Hispanic, Native American, and other ethnic groups. And today we sit here and still don't have those payments. And I believe that the administration and the Department of Justice can take a more vigorous approach to come up with some resolve there. So it doesn't answer your question directly, but I thought it was an opportune time to raise that issue of debt relief as well.
John, can I have you just add to that? I'm Karen, I'm sorry, about CRA, community reinvestment.
Yes.
Those are our dollars that need to go back into those.
Yes.
But agriculture is definitely left out of those pillars.
Yes, and CRA, that I certainly missed that as well, where the banks continue to get credit for agricultural lending to farmers of color, but they're not actually lending any monies to us. So the regulators have to, they're too close in friendship to the actual banks themselves to do the job. So they're giving these banks a free pass, and right now the farmers of color are being reported delinquent on credit bureaus, so they can't get outside credit, and we called on the top 10 banks to come to the table and provide emergency funding. And as of yesterday, they haven't committed a damn dime to it. So we got to do better, and we have to hold CRA, these banks accountable. We have to hold USDA accountable. We have to hold the Department of Justice. All of these persons that affect our farming operations have to be held accountable as well.
Thank you, John. Michael?
So obviously I don't quite know as much about the farm workers stuff as anything else, but I will touch on these 2 points because just like everything in the world, a lot of this rolls back to money. So the simple thing, one thing would be funding the FTC to full employment so that they can actually enforce some of these rules. Nobody up here wants to have workers that aren't taken care of because we actually are the CEOs of our company, unlike big companies, so I gotta work with you every day. So if I make money because these rules are enforced and I can actually fight in a fair world, I can afford to provide better health care for all of my employees, not just the ones that are full-time. And secondly, there's been stuff in the past that would let associations such as like our state association that does the food industry or like his association for farmers could come together and use all their power to go after better workman's comp rates or health insurance rates. And every time those come up, the insurance companies fight to get those knocked down. So those are, from my side of it, very simple things that, again, once you kind of clear that money up, that always clouds everything that goes on here in DC. It allows us to have some power to, number one, afford it because the rules are enforced, and two, go together as a much bigger group of folks to get better rates for our workman's comp, for health insurance, for all the things that we want to provide to our employees, again, because we're the ones that, there's not a day goes by that I don't buy groceries in the grocery store. I mean, that's just the way it is. And so we are out there fighting with them too. So, it's harder for us to look somebody in the face and go, sorry, I just can't afford to give you health insurance right now, because right now, for me to put somebody on health insurance, it costs me $8.25 for every hour they work. So in explaining to somebody that you're paying, $12 or $13 an hour to run a cash register, that really you're making about $23 an hour, it's pretty tough for them to understand when they're going, well, you're only paying me $12 an hour. You're going, well, all your health insurance that I pay is costing me $300 a week because I have no leverage to go get better rates from these guys.
That's right.
Yep.
Thank you, Michael. Dennis?
Yeah.
Yes.
Well, I'll go back to my opening statement and refer back to my point about the Farmer Labor Alliance during the New Deal. And I pointed to that as an example of working together, but I also, in this context to this answering this question, need to point out that people were left out of that deal, right? And the people who were left out were blacks and Hispanics, because people may not realize this, but the South used to be solid Democrats, right? And Roosevelt needed them to vote for the New Deal. And the last thing that those Democrats wanted were black people organizing their workers on the plantation and organizing their house workers in the servants in the houses. So that was the dirty deal that was cut in the New Deal and left people out, and we're paying for that to this day. We believe that at UFCW, and my boss is also the president of the International Food Workers Union. My boss is Mark Lawrenson, the head of the meatpacking division of UFCW, and he pounds this into my head all the time. And our fundamental belief is that workers' rights are human rights as acknowledged and recognized in the UN's original Declaration of Human Rights as the right to organize a union. And that includes the right to freedom of association, to organize a union, and to bargain collectively for better wages and benefits free from retaliation. And this is the problem that we face today, is almost every most employers, I think I can fairly say in the United States, whenever someone starts to workers try to organize a union, there is a whole cottage industry that has developed around making sure of union busting and suppressing the rights of workers to talk to each other about whether or not they want to have a union and what are the pros and cons of doing that, and suppressing that debate and holding captive meetings. So one answer to this is the PRO Act, is the Protect the Right to Organize Act, is all the labor unions are rallying around that and trying to get that passed. We haven't got it done yet, but that is sort of our wish list of how you would fix the abuses that are going on that front. I also just want to tell a story about the good food purchasing policy that I mentioned, because in one of our cities, as we passed that ordinance, as I mentioned, there's these 5 value categories, including fair prices for, well, it didn't have, at that point, it didn't have fair prices for farmers, but farmers were part of it. But we were able to get in there that one of the highest scores in the value of the workforce category is a union contract. Well, as this ordinance passed and the word got out into the small farmer movement, there was kind of pushback of the small farmers saying, look, we can't afford to pay, $15 an hour. We're worried about it, this part of this policy that includes the right to organize and having union contracts. And that sort of brought home to us, like, this just reiterated the point about fair prices that we had already been working on in the context of the wake of the drought, trying to address the rebuilding of the cattle herd. And that is, we have to support a fair price for farmers from the unions, because if farmers aren't getting a fair price, there's no way they can pay the workers a fair wage and benefit. And so we have to align. And so in that case, we actually worked to put new language in the ordinance, the model ordinance, that explicitly says that farmers have the right to a fair price that includes the cost of production, including fair remuneration for their labor and management. Now, we haven't necessarily, in the whole 10-year effort of the good food policy, have not solved that problem, right? This is part of the problem we're here today, is that farmers aren't getting a fair price. And workers not getting a fair wage is directly tied to that, not to mention if farmers got a fair price and workers got a fair wage, well, they're more likely to spend that money in our rural communities than the Wall Street bankers that are an extractive model that come in with the CAFOs and extract wealth from our rural communities.
Yeah. Thank you very much, all of you. And Lorette, thank you for that question, which led to very rich points. I'm going to take some prerogative here and just try to tie all of these points together. And I'll be a little bit more crass than our very polite panelists here. We used to enslave people to do the brutal, menial labor of agriculture. And you would have thought after emancipation that meant there was a realization that these human beings and the labor that they contributed to the food system needed to be justly remunerated, so that thereafter laws and wage policy would reflect the value of people that perform the menial, brutal labor of agriculture. And as you've heard recounted, we never did anything of the sort. And in fact, we've enforced in labor law through exemptions to labor law, meaning we know exactly what we're doing and whom we're doing it to, that those workers are not subject to the same protections that the rest of us expect in our places of work. So that reflects an exploitative culture. And as our panelists have reminded us, the very reason that we're here is not because the money to cover all of the expenses in the food system is not there. It is that it is siphoned and concentrated in corporate monopolies, and particularly under the doctrine of stockholder primacy. That's where the emphasis is. That's where the money needs to be concentrated under this view of economics, rather than in a way that reflects proportionally the value of everyone that's involved in producing our food, beginning with farm laborers. So I appreciate the fact that each of you had your contribution to clarify that point. And again, thanks, Laurette. Other questions?
Thanks very much. Just to pick up on, I think Carrie said delay, delay, delay. One of the ways that's enforced is through blackout in the media, as we know. And that takes me to a question of just a couple of blackouts that are so awful is internationally, there's been a lot of protest. India, we saw publicized, but farmers have been on the streets in Spain and Germany and Ireland and elsewhere. And another blackout is with things internationally, with the hyperinflation and everything, there is really, you could call a kind of new non-aligned movement for those who are older here. And I'd be so interested in anyone up here or in the room about, because different people have said we should work together. And this isn't a formal thing, but we have an emergency. I think we're facing world famine. It's not just infant formula and toilet paper. We have diesel shortages we're going to have. Diesel exhaust fluid is supposed to be going out this summer. So the fight that everyone has described here that's been going on for years is terrific. And anyway, so I'd like to hear that. I myself have been part of networking in recent years. It's two. People say, when are you going to retire? I guess I don't have a chance. But with the Schiller Institute, to bring together people who are fighting in Argentina or Africa, and anyone, we're having a weekend online conference. I'd be glad to tell anyone about it. It's called the Schiller Institute. But I'd be so interested in any of your thoughts of what ought to be, because I think we have a world-class emergency.
Thank you for that question. And before we open up for answers here, I got the high sign here from our organizers that we'll make this the last round of answers, and then we'll close our event this morning. So, thoughts?
Well, the positive out of the pandemic was that we started meeting virtually, and we found neighbors that we didn't know we had, and allowing people from other countries and other societies and everything else to communicate with us and us to communicate with them. Because the ability to meet with someone where you don't have to pay a $3,000 airplane ticket to go talk to them was very important. That's a positive. Joe and I teased on our way in this morning that we're no longer in the world of from here up. You know, it's all of us moving and mobilizing now. So that's been very important as far as meeting. And I agree with you that we're sitting on something that the consumer has no idea is coming, because they can still go buy chuck roast for $6.99 a pound. And we've got to keep them aware of what the big picture. So John's a hell of a lot more eloquent than I am about it, but I agree that we're right on the edge of something.
Yes. And thank you. And I'm coming to get you because you already got the fire. I mean, but yes, I think that the farm movement may wind up in the streets of Washington and some of the other areas with picket signs and things of that nature, because what's coming down the pike isn't something that we can control up here in this panel. The scenario that I described as a food crisis, and that's what we're heading for in this country. When things don't come out the end of the pipeline, that's what leads to getting others involved as well. We have to be able to touch and get involved the American public, the general people that go to work every day, to start to pay attention to this issue. And the minute we do that, I think you'll see some change and more action around some of the things, all of the things that we've described today. And one thing I want to thank the panel for is having a very cohesive a message today. I didn't know what you were going to speak about, but every panelist spoke about coming together and unity and bringing about some sort of change around the food industry. So the message is right, I believe the timing is right, and I think you're going to see it in the coming future.
Yeah, just to touch on the COVID thing, I think it's going back to the media. What we always thought was such an efficient system of running our food channels down. That it was you had just enough. That made perfect sense in the regular economic thinking of everything's running somewhat normal. When things become abnormal, which, as we know, could happen literally at the flip of a switch nowadays. It was Friday the 13th that COVID happened. I live in Savannah. We have a huge St. Patrick's Day parade. It was that Tuesday coming up. It got canceled that Saturday beforehand. So all these places that already bought food. Anyway, I say that to say all this, that we've shown that we're not quite as nimble in our food system as we thought we were, and it is a lot more fragile than we probably ever thought it was. There's never been a time where I ordered something and it took more than one, or I get 3 trucks a week from a warehouse. If I didn't get it on one truck, it was probably coming the next. Now there's stuff I still got on the shelf that hadn't come in for months, just because it's not worth producing, because it's not in the top 10 things that that company might produce. And so it's sad that it took this for people to realize that there's problems that we've been trying to fight for literally decades now. And it wasn't just us, tooting our horns. We really saw legitimate problems that we were trying to fix before they became real problems to the consumer. And COVID's just kind of shown us that they were real problems and they do need to be fixed.
Dennis?
Yeah, I guess my response would be, again, going back to the New Deal for some lessons, right? Like it's, we didn't get everything right in the New Deal, but we got some things right. And one of the things we got right was supply management with a strategic grain reserve. And we got that driven home for us at UFCW, again, with the shutdown of these plants. So if people remember that, the drought started in the Southern Plains in 2011 and expanded to the rest of the country in 2012. And by that time, these beef plants were starting to shut down. Well, then we're going into 2013, and remember, the Farm Bill was totally deregulated by the neoliberals who have been attacking the New Deal from the day one, and they couldn't get rid of it because of the Depression. We needed it then. We had the political strength. They couldn't get rid of it during World War II because we needed the production for the war. But after the war, they came in under McCarthyism and called it command and control socialism, and they worked for 50 years to dismantle it, and they succeeded in the 96 Farm Bill to totally deregulate the Farm Bill and strip those last provisions of supply management out, the strategic grain reserve, the acreage set aside, the minimum price for farmers. All of those things had been watered down, but they were still there, and they were totally stripped. And that unleashed overproduction and drove grain prices to far below the cost of production. And Tufts University has crunched the numbers on that, and they added up the 96 Farm Bill for about 7 years. They figured out how far below the cost of production the feed grains were, and then they divided it up among beef, the industrial pork, industrial poultry, and industrial dairy. And if you add that up over that 7-year life of the 96 Farm Bill, it amounts to a $35 billion indirect subsidy to the industrial meat and livestock complex. And from a climate perspective, that was a disaster. Because if you go back to the 1970s, when you still had most of that intact, we had probably 40 to 50,000 independent family farm feedlot operators in the U.S. out in the Midwest. And they were feeding their own cows, but they were all growing corn and soybeans, but they all had a sustainable pasture rotation in that rotation in either a beef cow herd or a dairy cow herd. But as the company succeeded in deregulating the grain prices to below the cost of production. It got to the point where Cargill could buy the grain from themselves on the market at below the cost, 30% below the cost of production, feed it to their own cattle in their own feedlots. And there's no way those farmers out on the countryside were paying the real cost of production for the fuel inputs and everything else. So what happened? They sold off those herds, and they plowed up those pasture rotations into more corn and soybeans that just made the problem worse. And from a climate perspective, when you think about that, what that in essence did is move millions of head of cattle off of millions of acres of sustainable pasture rotations that were rebuilding soil and fixing carbon in the countryside and making the countryside more resilient, move them off the farms and into industrial confined animal feeding operations that are based on fossil fuel monoculture, corn and soybeans, that are now draining, chemicals into the Gulf of Mexico and creating a dead zone the size of Rhode Island, right? So that's where we're at, and we need to go. So I guess to come back to the answer to the question, I think is we've gained some momentum, and we didn't get the Build Back Better. There was a lot of potential in that. We didn't get it over the finish line, but that momentum is there, and we got to keep pushing that into I think where people are regalvanizing here is in the farm bill, right? There's a lot of interest now focusing on the farm bill, and things like strategic grain reserve and an antitrust competition trial need to be part of that agenda that brings everybody, more stakeholders to the table, so we have the power to win some of these things.
Thank you very much for that very big picture, Dennis, and all panelists. Thank you very much for your
I'm just going to say
contributions.
one thing. It's not the farm bill, it's the food bill. Let's rename it.
Yes. Yeah. Thanks, Carrie. Okay, well, I will pass the word back to Barry. I'll just remind you, you heard in the first hour that open markets and farm action have given us tools that we can use in order to continue with this dialogue. So, Barry.
Let's give those folks another round of applause. That was a great. This is our first live in-person event in 2.5 years, and we kept it a little small. We plan to get bigger in the future, but these guys did just a fantastic job, and just thrilled to have them. I'm thrilled to have all of you today. Just so, a little summary here. John Boyd earlier said that we are in a crisis. Yes, indeed. We see prices going up, up, up. We see supply chains breaking down. We see empty store shelves, empty of food. John also said they, and he meant big business, and the folks who work for them, the politicians who work for them, are dividing us. Amen to that. And I want to conclude with an idea for how the USDA can begin to repair that divide. Earlier, Trina spoke about the tournament system in chicken farming. Trina said they use the tournament system to pit us against one another. To pit us against one another. Let's do a little history on the tournament system. In 2008, Congress instructed the executive to eliminate the tournament system. In 2010, the DOJ and the USDA held all of these hearings and established rules to do a whole bunch of things, which included getting rid of the tournament system. In 2013, someone you may have heard about this person, Lena Khan. She wrote an article on the Washington Monthly called Obama's Game of Chicken about the tournament system. In 2015, John Oliver put the tournament system on primetime TV. It is 2022, Mr. Vilsack. The tournament system, with its manipulation and extortions and its pitting of people one against another, routinely, automatically is wrong. It is economically wrong. It is politically wrong. It is morally wrong. So too is the labeling system in our country. So too is the import regime in our country. So too is the retail regime in our country. So too is how we treat our workers. We don't even give them the liberty to come together and bring their labor capital together in the way that any capitalist can bring their capital together. That is wrong. It's strawberry season. My dad grew up as a sharecropper in Florida, not that far from Immokalee. He sharecropped from an hour before dawn until an hour after dusk. He was picking strawberries. When I grew up, we didn't have strawberries in our house. My brother and I would say, Dad, those strawberries are awful pretty in the store. Can we buy some of the strawberries? And my dad would say, no, because I know how many drops of blood are in every one of those strawberries. Mr. Vilsack, this ain't about math. This is about blood, the blood of real people. And it is also about democracy. And the real people whose blood is at stake are getting together to help you solve all of these problems. Mr. Vilsack, your president has asked you to fix these problems. He instructed you to fix these problems. We're here to help. We're here to work with you. You could be a hero. You will be a hero. We know it. We trust in you. Anyway, I want to turn it over real quickly to Angela.
Thank you, Barry. I just wanted to again thank everyone for attending, and a special thank you to all the folks a little bit more behind the scenes, handling the logistics and the technology for today's event. We really appreciate it. And then finally, just a call to action. We hope that, like us, you will work to encourage these agencies to deliver on the vision contained in Biden's executive order for a more fair, inclusive, and competitive food system. Thank you.